Hi everyone. Today I will be it's Ren. In case you didn't know, I can still rely on this little anti-bourgeois self-guilt, self-hatred poster that I collected once from a shop, not a shop, a cafe where they had like this little. It's actually like a program for a festival that took place a few years ago, and I was always amused by this contradiction. Um, but this aside, today I want to discuss Myers-Briggs, MBTI. Before those who are averse to it run away, I would like to just indicate that this video is actually going to be kind of a little bit of a, not so much a defense of Myers-Briggs, people who don't like it, people who think it's bullshit or reductive, because you hear that argument a lot, are allowed to think that, of course, but I will try to explain from my perspective why it is that Myers-Briggs is relatively popular and, certain people take it seriously enough to join communities that are articulated around belonging to a certain type. So why is Myers-Briggs popular? Well, the skeptics, I think, will probably think that the reason why it's popular is because it offers you this prepackaged test that you can just answer, get a type, a 4-letter type, one of 16, that will correspond to them, and to which they will then be able to sort of identify and sort of have a sense of belonging, and also read descriptions of this type that are usually quite complimentary, tell them they're special, or tell them that they have particular attributes and they will recognize themselves in them out of the confirmation bias that we see in horoscopes, where you sort of read a horoscope and it tells you, this is going to happen in your life or whatever, and you're sort of going to unconsciously try to identify events that do fit that pattern, and so that's roughly speaking what confirmation bias is about. And I think the skeptics about MBTI think that a lot of confirmation bias happens in the case of MBTI. So they question the scientific relevance of it, the verificability of it. I think I might have invented a new word. Not that I have the French equivalent in my mind, but anyway, you know what I mean. And yeah, in general, just that it's this kind of shallow thing that people take too seriously and behave as if they were belonging to a certain type. Maybe there are other reasons why, some people are critical of it, or don't take it seriously, or even sometimes take it with suspicion. I think that for a while, myself, I saw it kind of in that way. Until, I'm 31 this year, and I think I only started to take MBTI seriously at the beginning of last year. So it would have been less than 2 years, a year and a half max. So it's not really that long compared to other people that I've met since online, who have been familiar with their type for 10 years, 12 years, and who are still very closely connected to it, and who connect with other people who are also of that type, or of other types. And I think that for me, what made the difference was, from taking it sort of as a mild, let's look at what I might be, and have this kind of almost this vain interest in knowing what category I fit in, and so I could tell people, I'm rare or whatever, or I'm smart, depending on what you get. The reason why I stuck to it is because I realized that the theory behind it was actually a lot more complex than people assume it is. I think way too many people think that what the test does is sort of identifies whether you are an extrovert or an introvert, whether you're more like concrete or abstract, whether you're more like of a feelings person or of a logical thinking person, and whether you are organized or like sort of, you know, open world, free spirits, artistic, kind of you know, kind of like drawing Peter Pan sort of drawings, and thinking about the fairies all the time. And it's true that like a lot of people think that way, and the letter codes, the letter code can promote that idea because it presents you with letters, just as in the same way that like 16 personalities, which is like the most well-known, probably in the collective sort of you know, the cultural collective, the most well-known MBTI website. I mean, people who are interested in MBTI know it's far from the most reliable, but like it is the best known. It even like gives you a name, like the mediator or the guardian or whatever, you know, the architect. And so people can be like, oh, you know, I'm the architect and I'm this, and it does contribute to this kind of this cartoony, banal aspect of MBTI where people are just taking it as a game. You know, it's that's what it is. It's sort of presented as a game, and I think that package as a game works because it kind of attracts people's interest enough to like for them to want to do the test, and so it spread its fame. Like the MBTI spread its fame, but I don't think it spreads it in the right way because, well, people who do it for these superficial reasons and without looking into it, yeah, like after a while they lose interest because their interest in the first place was never awoken properly. Maybe they didn't want to sort of go into that territory because they have other things to do, or just like fields of interest that are different and that matter to them more. But the thing is, anyone who has this feeling that like behind the codes, behind the letter code, which can easily be turned into like this kind of label that people associate themselves with, there is actually like a function theory, and that is the reason why I think MBTI can be so fascinating for certain people, and why certain people identify with it so seriously. It's not because they think, oh, I'm in this community because this is my type. You know, we're like the rare introverted, abstract, kind of artistic people. Like, no one really thinks that way, because anybody who has such a superficial approach is gonna either completely forget about MBTI, or like they are going to just talk about it in passing. Often you'll hear, oh yeah, a bit like the horoscope, or they'd be like, oh yeah, it can be good for HR to sort of have a vague idea of people's traits, which is already pointing towards a real use of MBTI. But these people are never going to sort of stick to it. It's not true that like people, there are like some really vain, superficial people who like to say they are of a certain type and stick to it for years without ever looking into it, because people get bored of it. By definition, people who stick to it for years are people who have dug into it and found something compelling, found a narrative and a theory that they found explanatory, that was saying things about them. And that is the function theory. And I'm not going to necessarily go into the function theory today, like in detail, because I've already been talking for 8 minutes, and I wouldn't want to make this video longer than like 12, 13 minutes. You know, the function theory is essentially saying that like there are 8 main cognitive processes that exist in humans. So, you know, we have our brains, and we relate to the world with our bodies and our minds. And if you like, this kind of concatenation of body and minds is the frame that we have and with which we relate to the world and to others. And the theory of functions, that is like the bedrock and the basis of MBTI, which was, and people often don't know that, initially developed by the very famous psychoanalyst Carl Jung, on the basis of like genuine, like empirical, you know, testing analysis with patients. Like that function theory is interesting. Carl Jung is a serious guy. He's taken seriously by a lot of psychologists. Like, he's not nobody. So usually when people like learn that it's based on Carl Jung's ideas, like all of a sudden they start taking it a bit more seriously. It's just a shame that like often people don't know that. So whenever you meet a skeptic, tell them that, and like you'll see their face, their expression will change. And like these functions that Carl Jung identified are about just different ways to relating to the world according to its true sensation, intuition, thinking, and feeling, which exists in everybody, and he says like everybody has a particular order of relating to the world according to these functions, and like there are two functions that are extroverted and two that are introverted, and you cannot have like sort of, well, you know, the model sort of suggests that usually the stack would be either introverted, extroverted, introverted, extroverted, or the reverse, but that, you know, most people will not have like introverted, introverted, extroverted, extroverted, or the reverse. And so everybody like sort of is geared towards, according to this theory, looking at the world and relating to the world in a certain way that is actually quite abstract, complex, extremely layered. You're not going to just read, oh, like you're a thinker or whatever. No, it's very, very detailed. There's a lot of research and there's a lot of data that you can sort of explore about what it means to be an intuitive thinker, or like an introverted intuitive, or like or an extroverted sensor. I mean, you guys probably don't understand what I'm talking about for those who don't know about MBTI much, but like these things mean specific sort of thought processes, and I can tell you that they correspond to behaviors, and that once you've identified a process that is quite like a function process that is quite high up in the person that you know, you can actually predict like that the behavior of that person, and it starts showing that it has explanatory value, and that it can be really helpful, and it can show like the depth of a person's personality according to the tendency of that personality. Because what's also really interesting about it is that people like use functions according to a spectrum, and according to like some kind of percentage of, you know, function use. So the stacks tend to be quite varied, and there are like the functions that we're not supposed to use that we're still used to an extent, and we have a relationship with those functions. It's very, very, very diverse, and it's incredibly difficult to sort of find two people who use like a function stack exactly in the same way. In fact, it's impossible. I've never ever met anybody who has my function stack as I have identified it. So this tells you a lot about the fact that in the end, like a 4-letter sort of code like INFJ for myself is only a way for people who have the same tendencies towards the same cognitive functions to be able to relate to each other, to meet up, and to realize also what their differences are. The fun is actually to see how different we are. People who think that like people of the same type form communities because like they're like, oh yeah, we're like rare and stuff. I mean, there is a sense of identity, but usually we're interested in like the difference, because there are just millions of different INFJs according to their cognitive functions. There are millions of different ENFPs or INTJs, and that's what people, if they realize that, maybe the skeptics will change their minds. And the people usually who join communities and stick to them, what they're interested in is not, oh, let's find the other cool people of that type. No, what they're thinking is, if I sort of join a community where people identify with that type, well, that type is sort of a way for me to know that these people will sort of be like sufficiently similar to me that I will be able to relate to them, and sufficiently different for me to sort of have a sense of identity and of relating to them as people, first of all, and not as a 4-letter code. So this was my defense of MBTI, and thank you for watching if you have made it so far. Oop.